So where did these results come from? They came from us measuring the pulse of Taipei, which we have done with Adelaide, thank you Irma, and we've done with Helsinki, thank you Jarmo. And I'm just going to remind you a bit what we looked at. We looked at 4 areas. One, how do you nurture the potential of the city? How open is it? How much do people trust each other? How accessible is it? The other part of that is, what's the talent development like? What's the learning landscape like? So we looked at that area. That's our first cluster of issues. And so we were, in terms of openness, for example, saying, how open is Taipei to new ideas and people? Can it cope with different people? Is it physically and psychologically open when you wander around the streets? These sort of issues we looked at. So the question is, what is the balance between openness and closedness? And then also the way ideas perhaps are taken up, new ideas are taken up in the city. And also how you might be dealing with people from different backgrounds in Taipei. And one issue that emerged quite strongly, which I know Chu Ping is very interested in, and you've achieved something very recently, is this question of immigration. Because on the one hand, we're worried about people leaving, but the problem is exacerbated because it's very difficult to come into Taipei if you're a talented person from Finland, the Netherlands, Australia, or whatever else. It's very difficult to do that. And so this is all the cluster of issues we looked at there. The next issue area we looked at was, again, about learning. And what we felt is, or what came across, was there was a lot of formal learning, universities and so on, and that's fantastic. And the issues you just raised there about being so high in the evaluations is obviously good. But the issues that came up was very much that so much of the new learning is more informal, in other settings, not to do with universities. Also older people learning, often linked with the outside world, and often learning institutions not being like big islands, you know, which are quite closed, but more linked into the city and sort of part of the fabric of the city in all sorts of ways. So those were the issues that again were raised there. And people were saying there must be other forms of learning beyond the ways we do it now. This is just one of the leading learning centres in Bilbao that happens to be a library, just as one example. The second area we looked at was this thing about the political framework, the leadership, the professionalism, which I've already discussed a bit. And here, what became really clear is that there is too much regulations and not enough incentives. Insufficient incentives to do things. There is too much being concerned about the detail rather than saying, this is the general direction we want to go, but in order to get there, we might need to be flexible. And thirdly, what emerged was that perhaps within the public administration, there wasn't enough of an ethos to empower the staff in those settings. So a lot of people talked about spaghetti, the organizational spaghetti, or in English we say red tape. So these were some of the issues that were talked about. And the other issue that was talked about, which I've mentioned already, was this lack of ability to connect across department and sectors. But again, here, the sort of issues that came up was that perhaps there should be less reports and more implementation. Things should be more results focused, and with our colleagues from the Netherlands and Finland we've been discussing that perhaps there's far too much over-monitoring of key performance indicators, so that the people who are trying to do things are continually having to report back and can't do the work that has been agreed that they should do. And this really needs to be addressed, and the issue of trust is an issue that emerges. So perhaps less of these reports, fewer reports than more. you get the idea, communicating across boundaries. The third area was, what was the level of entrepreneurship like, and how well does the city communicate? And here we found that the level of entrepreneurship, as you know, is incredibly strong in Taiwan. How would you have then created the IT revolution if you hadn't had that level of entrepreneurship? The engineering capacities, all of these things are all to do with innovation and so on. So of course that was very high. There was also other forms of entrepreneurship, which is represented by the urban regenerations organisations, URS stations, urban regeneration stations, and you probably know this is in Dihua Street, and it's just an example of something that looks crazy, but actually has been incredibly effective in a catalytic way in generating a street there. Here, in one of that same building, and we were here yesterday, is precisely one of the sort of future ways of thinking, which is a small co-working space, which again is perhaps completely different from the typical corporate structures that we're used to. And so all of this is about information, about people communicating across boundaries. And again, you know, for example, the Esli bookshop is just a representation of the many good things that are happening in Taipei that perhaps need to be brought together. But one of the problems that emerged is what I call the map of disconnected knowledge. In order to make a great city, you need things like engineering, chemistry, psychology, physical planning, and so on. And if you do a map of that, like you can see here, you see that these groupings are not communicating with each other. The fourth area we looked at, which again Taipei is incredibly strong in, is the level of distinctiveness. How is the place evolving, and how livable you are. And here, the results in general were very positive, that obviously, if you want to know about China, as you expressed earlier, you're more likely to want to find out about that in Taiwan than anywhere else. And here, this is the Yongle market, and obviously this is versions of the new Taiwanese red that was beginning to be developed. And obviously the issues about livability and so on has been seen as very positive in this place. Now, why did we keep on focusing? Why is this word creative always there? Perhaps it's being now used too much, but the point is that doesn't mean that it's irrelevant just because many people use the word. And I think it's because it really is like a currency. It's a new form of currency, it's a resource, it's a new form of capital. And the aim of any city that intends to be more in this direction is to create the conditions for people to be able to think, plan, and act with imagination. And if I were to summarize the book that initially I wrote in one sentence, I would say it tries to bring together this inventiveness that exists in most people and tries to find imaginative solutions to any problems or any opportunities. And the question is, it's not why so much, it's really a matter of survival. We all know we're in this period of transition. So it's less a question of saying why, it's a question of asking more, what is the cost of not doing this sort of thing? And I think the first thing, if you were looking at it as a cycle, you'd have to say, let us encourage more curiosity in Taipei. If we are more curious, we might be more imaginative. If we're more imaginative, we might have some interesting ideas. Out of those interesting ideas, one or two of them might be very good, which become inventions, which then ultimately become an innovation. And I think we all know that when one goes through that process, the impacts are large. Now, the second book, which had the title Harnessing the Collective Imagination, focused on a couple of things. It basically focused on the paradox, the Taipei or the Taiwanese paradox. Culturally, this place is incredibly entrepreneurial, but there's a big but. People seem to have not that much trust in government, or less trust than one would hope, but at the same time expects government to solve problems and to subsidise the problems. So there's this paradox that is very strange for an outsider to see. And one of the issues, it's a bit like this paradox here, do not enter, enter only. It's a sort of paradox that I still haven't solved, so it's not for us external people to solve it. You've got to solve this paradox. And I think one of the things we've basically said is this can only be solved by bringing the different parties together to have a conversation about this massive paradox in order to combine the different insights, crossovers, the different value of the public and the private sectors, all these things that are well known. And in particular, one of the issues we found in terms of the big disconnect was the older, the best of the old and the best of the new wasn't really coming together. So for example, the people who were involved in developing HTC, ASTA and all of these things do not seem to be connecting with the younger generation, or the younger generation find it rather difficult to connect with them. And equally, we could say the best of the new and the best of the old, somehow there's this mutual lack of perhaps appreciation. So that's all about words which have become cliches, which of course is about some form of partnership. So we then said, okay, let's create a platform, a creative platform to make more of the potential. Now you will immediately ask and say, what the hell is a platform? That's just one of these words. Everybody's using this word platform. Is it useful in any way? Now, the way we see the platform, a creative platform, is a kind of engine, a promoter, an advocate, an enabler, an influencer, to open up the system and address the problems or the issues I've just raised, and be perhaps less concerned about undertaking many projects. So at a general level, this platform should have as a shared goal to focus and highlight on this talent agenda. So it's the central issue, not one of the many issues of many different organisations, in order to safeguard Taipei's wealth creation prospects. More specifically, we said that the first step, you say, what is the shared goal and what's the vision? What do you do tomorrow? We feel that the issue of space and place is really urgent, that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of younger people who are looking for space. And when you do find the people doing interesting things, you very rarely can actually see them because they're hidden in some building, doing interesting things. And we feel there needs to be some slightly more visible, bigger place where you can see the sort of interesting stuff that is happening in Taipei. Obviously you see it in some of your showcases and so on. The second specific issue that we felt in terms of this shared goal of the platform, because we've done some attempts to bring the people together, is to avoid discussing the micro. Everybody's discussing some micro issue that is quite important but basically irrelevant to the bigger goal of the talent agenda. And so far, and I hope this changes today, is to focus on really that big issue of talent. Okay, the next thing then is, okay, being specific, what is the first practical step? And we think we should identify places where these people, of which there are really hundreds, if not thousands, should be able to cluster and become together in a kind of hub. And if that happens, we're saying just get on with it, overcome the obstacles that I think you all know about, and this will begin to create the linkages that everybody talks about when they discuss issues like how do you establish a creative milieu.